May I begin?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. It's so great to be here. My name is Dr. Maria Armstrong, and I'm the Executive Director for the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents. And I want to begin by just kind of setting the table, if you will. You know, we're talking about the Hispanic and Latino achievement in American education and how the pandemic has really brought to light many of the issues that have been plaguing our educational system for quite some time. And so now we want to talk about, you know, what the state of education for our Latino and Hispanic students is, and what will some of the opportunities and challenges that have been met by our families and students can take a look at how we can perhaps craft policy and really start to create some promises of practice to be able to use this situation that we have just been dealing with to come out stronger and better in the end. And so with that, I would like to be able to share a polling question for our members. What is the biggest challenge facing Hispanic or Latino students as schools reopen? Is it learning loss, lack of access to technology, access to vaccine for children 12 and under, or is it getting readjusted in the new school environment?
And thank you, Dr. Armstrong. In order to make this a rich discussion, we also have invited a student speaker, Ms. Ali Garcia, who will speak to us in just a few minutes, just a few moments. As we get into the conversation, though, we all know that before the pandemic, Latinos and African Americans faced more than a 20-point gap in achievement, which is not just a gap in academic achievement, but that translates into an economic, health, and other many other ways that that gap translates into a community's experience. After an insurmountable, an incredible year, and a historic year of learning loss, we thought, starting first with the voice of a student who's experienced it, persevered through, and is now looking on to the future in a more equitable way, and with her own thoughts about what should come next in order to not just go back to a normal, but really craft a future that is better than our past. So, Ms. Garcia, I'd love to give over to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with such amazing panelists. I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Ali Garcia. I'm a recent Cumberland University graduate. I'm here speaking on the behalf of my brother because I know we're focusing on K through 12, but also I have also had my personal challenges with it. I am actually a guardian for my brother. And so as a first generation graduate, I know so many challenges come with being a student of color. And I see those much more being an older sister. I actually was talking to my brother yesterday, and I think some of the biggest challenges I feel like people and our students of color are facing is low academic performance. From my experience with my brother, he doesn't feel motivated, which I feel like is something we see across the board. Our students aren't motivated, and it's in my belief that it's because, you know, they have low self-confidence at times because maybe they don't have students or their parents aren't able to continue to be that mentor for them. With Hispanic students in particular, a lot of their parents are either working or working even more during this pandemic. So it's really hard because I have to step as a guardian to kind of ask my brother how his grades are doing, which have gone down, unfortunately. And so I feel like we're in a time of disheartening for the future of our Hispanic students and our students of color in general. I think a lot of focus probably needs to be on just being more patient with our students, being able to see if we are catering to our students. There's a lot of cultural and language barriers that we already face in general, students of color. And so I feel like I'm focusing on how to bridge those because they've probably have increased in disparity now, especially with low access to technology and many other resources that perhaps parents or students are unaware of during COVID. So those are some of the points that I have seen in my brother. And I hope that through this panel and this discussion, it can help open up a lot of solutions or prospects to move forward with, to be able to really encourage our students, because this is a generation that perhaps has been called lost for time and time again. And I feel like our students need to be really invested to be the next upcoming leaders. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Ali. I'd like to turn over to our first speaker. I believe it's Roberto Rodriguez, also to add perspective to the leadership needed during the coming months and years.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Jason. It's wonderful to be with you and this distinguished panel for the conversation today. Ali, thank you for getting us started by grounding us in the perspectives and needs, the lived needs and experiences of our students. You know, I mean, we have to get, the bottom line here is we have to get just much more urgently busy about the work to bridge the opportunity gaps and achievement gaps that we see in our system that our Latino students are facing. And as our fastest growing population in our schools, we know that the pandemic has had an even greater impact disproportionately on our Latino families. And so we know that some of the needs of our Latino families and Latino students are even more compounded. You know, I think of the important resources that our Latino students bring to their learning, right? And the challenges that they continue to face in our communities where we have students that are still living in homes without high-speed internet. We know that 1 in 4 Latino kids live in households that don't have high-speed internet. We know that even prior to the pandemic, we had nearly 1 in 5 Latino kids that were living in homes that were food insecure, right? That were suffering from economic hardships. And that has been compounded to nearly half of all Latino homes over the course of this pandemic. So, you know, I think part of our education response here has to be thinking about how we double down on the stability and the success of our families and provide our Latino students the resources that they need to be able to succeed. You know, we are seeing tremendous leadership around the country from our teacher leaders and from other community leaders and parents and advocates to really push for more early childhood education and care. We know we need to start earlier. That's where our gaps in our system begin, you know, in kindergarten. So, and our Latino students are the most underrepresented group in early childhood education. We know we have to do more around building more healthy and thriving teaching profession that is diverse and talented. And while our Latino students make up such a large share in our public schools, we know that we have too few Latino teachers still in front of our classrooms. Only 9% of our profession is Latino. Only 2% of the profession is made up of Latino men. So there's a lot that we need to do to build those teacher preparation programs, those residencies, those grow your own programs, those programs that are Hispanic serving institutions and others that have a track record at preparing our Latino teachers to thrive. And we know we need to do more to provide the funding that we need to make sure that our Latino students can thrive. And I think some of what we've seen from Washington with the rescue plan will help us get there. But you know, districts serving majority Latino populations on average spend $5,000 less per student. So there's a lot of work to do there to really make those schools whole and get about the work that we need to do around recovering from this pandemic and rebuilding in a stronger way, in a way that is more learner-centered, in a way that responds in real time to students' academic needs, their social, emotional needs, in a way that doubles down on the relationships and the supports that our students need to be successful.
Peggy McLeod, I'd like to bring you into the discussion. UNIDOS, of course, is a storied policy organization working across the country with Latino serving institutions, of being a voice in Washington for Latinos in policy. What have you seen during this time, and what are you looking toward for a future, for a more equitable education experience post-pandemic for Latinos across the country?
Thank you, Jason, and thank you for having me on this terrific panel. As you mentioned, UNIDOS is a national organization. The work that we do, however, the really important work that we do is done through our affiliates, of which we have nearly 300 across 41 states, Puerto Rico, and the District of Columbia. During the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic particularly, our affiliates became first responders in their communities. They had to provide resources for those communities. They are trusted sources of information in the communities that may include mixed families, mixed status families. And so they provided rent assistance, assistance with gas, food, technology, and provided a lot of information about the pandemic. We started what we call an Esperanza, a hope fund, because we knew that our affiliates were in really desperate need for resources. So we gave them $25,000 and they could use that basically for anything, no strings attached. And they used it, again, for food support, rent support, technology, because we had to shift quickly, and they shifted too, to providing our education programs online. Obviously, they could not do that in person anymore. So we also partnered with different organizations. For example, we have a longtime partner, First Book, which is an organization dedicated to getting kids their first books. We heard from our affiliates that are migrant Head Start programs were, although migrant Head Start had allowed them to use their funding to take families diapers and food, they knew that a lot of students did not have access to books. So as I said, we partnered with First Book, got about 10,000 titles in the hands of children who did not have those at home. And even as we pivoted to work as an education team to support our affiliates, almost immediately our biggest concern became how badly hit our community was going to be by this pandemic, particularly those families that didn't have the technology, didn't have broadband access, had several children at home, maybe with a cell phone. And it quickly became very evident that the people that were suffering most were those parents who had children in school and who did not speak English. Schools did not shift very quickly. They continued to send materials in English to parents who could not understand them. And so one of the things that we did is we created a curriculum that is based on our Padres Comprometidos program, which is our parent engagement program. And we created a program called EdTech. The reason we created this program is that we created a series of resources and materials to support those parents who were having difficulty connecting with schools. The idea was to foster a close connection between schools and parents, and support their understanding to this really rapid shift to online learning, which, as you imagine, caused a lot of consternation to our parents. The data that we have show that the parent is effective in helping parents support their children's at-home learning. For example, parents, 84% of the participants now use the school's parent page on their website. Previously, it was like 62%. 74% feel connected to the school's parent community, and previously that was a 51%. UNIDOS has a large network of parents. There are 217 individuals that are connected through Facebook platforms, and those include facilitators for our Padres Comprometidos programs, as well as a group of parent leaders that we have trained in the past. During the beginning of the pandemic, this group was critical in parents from across the country shared resources. They shared resources on where to find food, where to find technology, books, and how to connect to the internet at home, including, you know, a discussion around low-cost options for parents. Right now, the parents are sharing a lot of information on the vaccine. And, you know, as always, we have a major component of the Padres Comprometidos curriculum is the graduation at the end of the 9-week program. And so we always are happy to see parents sharing their graduation photos. As we move forward, there are a lot of actions that schools can take. And Roberto just referenced the American Rescue Plan, and through using funds from the American Rescue Plan, we feel that there are actions that would be really important to support our students, including engaging families, meaningful engagement, not just sending stuff home, accelerating students' learning, particularly for English learners, either through tutoring or expanded learning time. Of critical importance, just for the last 4 years, but for this terrible year, is to provide students with resources for social emotional supports, particularly for those children who speak another language in the native language. And then use some of those funds to create the changes that are needed for supporting English learners, including improved data, high quality instruction. So those are some of the ideas that we, in some of our experience, with regard to our parents and communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to shift our conversation. By the way, I work for Leadership for Educational Equity. We're over 50,000 civic leaders across the country working to change laws on behalf of kids and communities. Over the pandemic, we saw our members form a digital equity coalition, for example, in California, and other leaders working across the country to, for example, advocate for parity in internet speeds for low-income programs, or really push schools to think about the future of internet infrastructure. I want to shift our conversation because clearly all of you are thinking about these issues of the digital divide, school equity, and access for kids of color. I want to shift to Sal Khan and then bring in other voices to kind of help us think about what is the future when it comes to Latino students in particular, but really all students, and leveling the playing field and really making sure that the next pandemic or event that creates learning loss that is unpredictable is not such a harsh long-term disruptor for the opportunities for our kids.
Yeah, there's a lot in that. Obviously, the work that we do as a not-for-profit at Khan Academy, mission free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. But the spirit of it is some people, some learners in the world are getting access to that, but a lot of folks aren't. And we've always, even pre-pandemic, been around how do we make sure that students have strong foundations so that they can accelerate their learning? How do we make sure that everyone has access to world-class learning? How do we make sure that teachers are optimally supported so that they can really differentiate instruction? Every teacher knows that 30 kids in their classroom have different needs. They're told to differentiate. They know it's the best practice, but they don't really get a lot of support in doing that. But for even pre-pandemic, for Khan Academy to do what it does, it needs some form of device connectivity, internet connectivity. And in all fairness, in the US, we've actually done a good job, I would say, over the last 10 years in the classroom environment. When I visited classrooms 10, 12, 13 years ago, it was hit or miss, especially if you go to historically under-resourced schools or serving historically under-resourced students. You didn't often see, for sure, one-to-one laptop or devices. That's gotten a lot better in the last 10 years in the schools with the E-rate program. But then the pandemic, all of a sudden, the home access became what everyone put the spotlight on. And it's a bit of a silver lining. It's been hard. It's been difficult. It's a lot of kids haven't been able to engage because of not just having basic access, but having access that is sufficient so that every member of their family can engage. But the silver lining is there's never been more energy than there is right now to fix the problem. And it has huge implications post-pandemic, because we saw even before the pandemic, a teacher, a school district wants to use Khan Academy. They know, they've looked at the efficacy studies. They know that this is going to be part of an arsenal that can really help serve students where they are, learning loss, unfinished learning, whatever you want to call it, accelerating them to wherever they need to get to, giving the teacher data that they wouldn't otherwise have. But if there's even one kid in the school who doesn't have it or in the classroom who doesn't have it at home, and we know in a lot of more under-resourced communities, it's not one student, it could be a third of the students who don't have sufficient access at home. You can't really utilize this tool. You can't really assign homework from it. You can't have the students work at their own time and pace. You can't leverage a tool like Khan Academy for summer learning or to keep kids learning during breaks, which is, as we all know, a huge time of learning loss. So I'm cautiously optimistic that, first of all of the heroic efforts over the past year to get laptop, New York City, 300,000 laptops. I think it was Miami, LA did 200,000. I don't think people are going to be able to take those back. I don't think they're going to be able to take back the supports. I love that there's, I think, on the order of 10 or $20 billion in the last stimulus package to solve this issue. So I think the pandemic has accelerated us forward at least 5 or 10 years on this front, but it can't happen too soon, because I've gone on the record saying this is a disaster recovery project right now. We've been through a hard time. Now we're entering the window of recovery, hopefully over the course of the next year. But if we're not able to do it in a full-throated way, these students are going to have those gaps, that unfinished learning, haunt them the rest of their lives.
Thank you. Ana Garcia, I want to bring you into the conversation, and then Will Del Pilar as well, and then circle back to a conversation about future solutions. So Ana, if you could share with us a little bit about what you're seeing, and particularly how you think about the future of this thing called Latino equity.
Thank you so much for having me this afternoon. I'm here representing LULAC. I'm the vice chair of the National Education Committee. I would like to echo and support every single word that has been said this afternoon, because there's really many different research studies that have been done for this year in terms of education. And definitely we know that the pandemic has impacted families and students unequally. But the uniqueness of the pandemic impact on our Hispanic community, we see this being twofold. In the first place, it allows us, the advocates, to discover, expose, and confirm the multiple inequities that we have found in the educational system. And secondly, it forced institutions like LULAC, for example, which is the largest and oldest Hispanic membership organization in the country, to evolve and transform by creating pathways, by creating partnership, by creating alliances at the national level to support the local and state level. The future, really, the future is going to be responding in how we responded to the pandemic. One of the things that LULAC did was that the LULAC National Education Committee was restructured into 3 subcommittees. We have a leadership committee, we have an innovation committee, and equity committee. This structure facilitated the responsive actions that we took during the pandemic. So that was important for us, because the only way that we could address the pandemic impact, we really needed to do something quick, faster, and definitely, something very, very unique for our families. During the pandemic, LULAC made extraordinary effort to support our Hispanic community by transforming internal operations and communication system, and making sure that we were more responsive to the immediate needs of our community. We offer programs, grants, policy development, national endorsement of any resources to bridge existing gaps in the community, vaccination centers, food information centers. In the policy side, the National Education Committee accomplished a busy agenda supporting congressional and state level bills related to equity and inclusion. One of the things that LULAC did was appointing a higher education task force because the impact was not only at the K through 12, but was impacted on the higher education side. So this higher education task force was appointed to conduct research on the national existing inequities in the faculty and higher education administrators. This task force is proposing now system policies on faculty recruitment, on faculty promotion and retention, in pay structures. We entered this discussion at the national level about the national assessment. And we all know that this debate divided our education community, unfortunately. LULAC understood that equity in education is a civil rights issue. So therefore, we supported assessment to equitably measure current learning loss of our underprivileged students. Our committee supported Dr. Miguel Cardona. We are in the planning to meet with Dr. Cardona just to make sure that we reaffirm our advocacy for bilingual education and equitably assessment. We have supported policies on federal funding for programs that help minimize learning loss through extended learning time. We believe in extending the learning time. That's part of the future that we see. We believe that not only the learning time, the day learning time, but also, the school year. And that is going to be very critical, to support. It's not extracurriculum activities. We're talking about instructional time. We can't really forget that our kids are between 6 and 12 months behind in the learning, catastrophe that happened during this past time. We also know that, it's very important to support administrators and teachers, and we did that. We have done that. We are supporting, like any other organization here in this afternoon, the American Job Plan, so the American Families Plan to provide, the 4 years free years of higher education. And during this time, I'm telling you, I think LULAC did, for the first time ever, we reached a new height. The National Education Committee initiated alliances with major educational organizations, including EdTrust. We have worked with the American Federation of Teachers on a parent survey. And these results really are very encouraging because parents say that they are ready for the students to come back to classrooms as long as they can return safely. We work with a team in a partnership with the For Driving Dreams grant, and we use that the money and all those grants in our 14. There was 14 councils. We benefited 29,000 people, and some of those programs included COVID response grants, and they included mental health grants. So that really is part of what we did, and the way that we see the future really is in education. We really like to continue advocating for recovering the students' learning through the extended the school day and the school year. I really would like to say that we are a very resilient community, and I'm glad that this time really has created major forces and strength, and have created more unity than before.
Excellent. Will del Pilar, I want to bring your voice in, and then Dr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Jason. I really appreciate the opportunity to share a few comments. We're at a critical juncture for the nearly 14 million Latino students nationally that are enrolled in K-12. If states and district leaders are committed to addressing the impact of the pandemic on unfinished learning and reopening better than normal, because normal was failing Latino students, and there are very tangible steps that can be taken. I think first we have to acknowledge that Latino students have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 school closures. A study from McKinsey estimated that Latino students might experience an entire school year of unfinished learning due to COVID-19. And when we look at the data compared to their peers, Latino students are least likely to have access to computers and high-speed internet. Like Roberto said, they're least likely to have access to full-time in-person instruction. They're least likely to have access to contact with their teachers. They're the least likely to have access to high-quality learning opportunities. Through the American Rescue Plan, Congress has provided an unprecedented $130 billion in funding to support K-12 education, and it explicitly requires states and districts to set aside 5 and 10% or 5 and 20% of funding they receive respectively to address unfinished learning for students most affected by COVID-19. States and district leaders need to focus on how to best leverage billions of dollars in stimulus on research-driven strategies to get students to reach grade level standards after more than a year of interrupted learning. We released a brief on unfinished learning, and I think they already linked it in the chat. But what we know the degree of unfinished learning caused by the pandemic will differ by student, subject, and grade. Research supports, 2 ways that schools can give students opportunities and the supports they need to complete unfinished learning. First is targeted intensive tutoring. And Peggy talked a little bit about this, but I want to build on what she said. But we know that research shows that it's effective for all students, but younger students benefit the most. Additionally, we know that expanded learning time is critical, and we know that increasing the number of hours of instruction students receive during the school day can be effective for all age groups, all types of students, and across all subject matter. But these 2 interventions only work if we build strong relationships. We know from the research that students from all backgrounds and ages benefit from strong relationships. Without strong relationships and connections between students and school staff, educators are going to struggle to catch students up. We have a new guide. We released with UNIDOS US on targeting resources from the American Rescue Plan to address the needs of English language learners. And I think that's also linked in the chat. There are over 5 million students, accounting for 10% of school-age children who are classified as English learners. We believe the ARP funds can help districts adequately support English learners where they have historically missed out on opportunities to create conditions for these students to thrive. But district leaders must keep in mind 3 principles. We have to meaningfully engage linguistically diverse families and communities. If local leaders truly want to ensure that ARP funds are used to build more inclusive and equitable systems than those that existed before COVID-19, they have to listen to those that are directly impacted by decisions made about districts and education systems. We have to accelerate student learning with targeted support for English language learners. And so we have to incorporate EL-specific instructional support into any summer or school year programming to accelerate learning. And we have to pair these with additional professional development on language development and cultural competent communication for all educators. And then, as Peggy said, we need to really think about the whole student. We need to provide students with socio-emotional, mental, and physical health support. If we're going to create a learning environment where students receive the supports they need to learn, develop, and thrive, we have to consider the specific needs of English learners. I just want to add, if we're going to make an impact for English learners in the long term, we have to build the infrastructure to support English learners. And we believe school districts can use these funds to address foundational challenges to support English language learners for many years. I think there are a lot of things state and district leaders can do, but I think the critical thing is we can't think about opening normal. We have to open up better than normal because normal wasn't working for Latino students. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Dr. Armstrong, we'd love to bring you back in.
Yeah, thanks. Pretty much want to echo and underscore that the research that's coming out are backing up the stories. And so, what we're finding is, inclusive of the McKinsey report, early on and throughout over a year now, we have been ongoing in doing some in-school tests only for those who have found their way back. Now, keep in mind, across the country, there are some schools who never closed. And so what we're finding is, and I know that there was fresh off the press last night, because there's different, organizations, companies and all that are doing their assessments. Curriculum Associates, one of them, where they have been, marketing throughout the year and marking, I should say, their results. And so what we're finding is, of course, is that it's a year, no matter how hard our teachers are working, a year under their belt is what they're back not being able to, quote, unfinished learning or teaching. And so we're seeing that in grades 1, 2, and 3 primarily for reading, and in grades 1 through 5 for math. So we're finding that in math, you know, they're further behind than in the reading. But nonetheless, we're talking about, you know, our Latino students along with our majority Black students. And I mentioned the notion of why we're looking at the data across the board and why incomes matter, because zip code has always mattered. And so we want to make sure that when we look at the 3 areas of policy, PD, and ARP funds, you know, Will just gave, he tossed out a percentage, 10 to 20% focused on this. Well, you know, I would urge our leaders to really think about targeted funding for those who need it most. And here's why. It's like, you know, you've been on a budget for so long, all of a sudden you got a little bit of a windfall and you want to do everything under the sun that you've never been able to do. And I learned a long time ago, there's enough money to do what you need to do, but not everything you want to do. So we've got to be very strategic and use data to help drive those directions of how to use those fundings so that that funding can stretch and really start to show how it's helping kids and not trying to do a lot of other stuff that is just being, you know, not dealt with over the course of many decades. So I too, as Sal said, you know, cautiously optimistic because we do have leaders that have shown, I know within our organization across all of our state affiliates, they have pivoted on a dime. They went from in the trenches of laptops and lunches to being able to start really working at strategic levels and been working on reopening plans. And it has been our Latino students where the fear of getting back into the classroom has been heightened. So as a parent, of course you're going to hesitate. You're going to hesitate immensely before wanting to send back your child to a school when you don't know what the unknowns are. So it behooves us to really start to communicate and get our kids back where they need, as well as give them what they need. So I'm a little bit passionate about that, as you can tell, and I'm so glad you brought me back into the conversation.
Absolutely. Roberto, I want to bring you back in as well, talk about these issues of policy, PD, and funding. And teacher voice in our future. And after that, like Sal, kind of like for you to talk a little bit about the role of technology in supporting teachers and staff and districts in meeting the challenges of the future.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jason. I just think such a great conversation to really capture so many of the needs that we've seen emerge over the course of this pandemic for our community, and just how the pandemic has laid bare so many inequities that had been contributing to the failures of our system and the challenges around accessing opportunity. But through all of that, I think we can see opportunity for building back anew and for beginning to think about, you know, addressing some of these long-time systemic barriers. So, you know, the voices and the vision and the ideas of our teacher leaders at Teach Plus for us has been such a wonderful reminder of what's possible. They've been on the front lines, providing our families the hardware that they need to be able to connect, visiting our families and being able to help parents engage and address some of those connections. Creating new opportunities for deeper family engagement and family involvement in education. Peggy talked a little bit about this, which is such an important point. We really do need to redesign our schools and rethink our approaches to how we engage our families and send them every message that who they are is an asset to their learners, is an asset to their children, is an asset to their community, and the language that they bring, the culture that they bring, the identity that they build with their students is an asset to their learning. So we have some shifts that we've been slow to make in education that I'm hoping the pandemic can help us begin to accelerate a bit more. We're seeing opportunities to build more distributed leadership in our schools, for our teachers to lead in new roles and take on new responsibilities around curriculum, around using technology, around providing social and emotional support to students, around acceleration and teaching to power standards. All of those types of things that we're seeing our teachers be able to step up and support their principals, right, for more of a distributed leadership charge in our schools. And we're seeing opportunities to do more to make sure that our students are supported as learners and as whole children in every right. So how do we think about connecting up to those school psychologists and social workers and counselors and folks that are going to help support our students in that recovery as they come back to school? So certainly don't want to diminish the challenges that we've all outlined here this afternoon, right? And there's a lot at stake for our learners, but we really believe, and I take a lot of optimism in the voices and the visions of our teachers to say we can actually build something from these ashes and we can rise bigger. We're developing a new project called the Phoenix Project that's focused specifically on thinking about how do we re-envision and reinvent out of this moment. And I think we have a real opportunity to put our Latino families and students front and center in that endeavor.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Salkan, love to bring you in and piggyback on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we have to look forward looking, and, I oftentimes am something of a poster child for online learning, but I'll be the first to say that if I had to pick between an amazing in-person experience and stick in sand and no technology versus the best technology on the planet, had to pick, I would pick the in-person experience every time, for myself, for my own children, or for anyone's children. And I also think that we often get in the trap of using technology for technology's sake. We've seen that multiple cycles of that over the years. So the goal is, where do we need to get pedagogically? And then what are the tools at our disposal to do it? And those tools can be chalk, it can be pencil and paper, it can be amazing caring adults, it could be the parents, or it might be some form of technology. I see there's two opportunities, and this is how we think about it at Khan Academy. There's opportunities to raise the floor. So we know that even pre-pandemic, there's a lot of kids who, for whatever reason, aren't having access to really world-class, rigorous courses, or even if they have access to the courses, they don't have access to the supports necessary to engage in those courses. And that's where we view at Khan Academy, where we can just go give resources to the world. And it is a little bit ad hoc whether people pull them or not, but we have Khan Academy Kids that now is a 1.5 million users between the ages of 3 and 6 every month, using 90 minutes a month. And we've done efficacy studies that 20 minutes a day for 6 weeks can close the gap between students in the bottom quartile and students who are operating at average. We want to make it a reality that every student, if they need help, that Khan Academy can kind of be the virtual tutor that your family otherwise couldn't afford. When we did surveys of first-generation students, especially Latino students at four-year colleges, this was several years ago when Khan Academy was much smaller, we said, has Khan Academy had a meaningful impact on your education? And we were hoping that 5 or 10% would say yes. It turns out that 65% said yes. And they said, this was the tutor that my family could not afford. This gave me access to rigorous material that my local high school might not have been able to fully support. So we want to do that work. And there's a new effort just launched last year called schoolhouse.world, another not-for-profit, give free tutoring to anyone who needs it. And the way it can scale in a cost-effective way is it leverages volunteerism, but the volunteers are world-class tutors who are as good as any tutors that anyone can afford to pay. So we want to provide those resources on a grassroots basis, but then we also want to raise the ceiling. In environments where the system is ready for it, how do we differentiate? How do we make sure that learning is not bound by time or space? How do we make sure that all that unfinished learning truly gets finished, while at the same time not sidetracking kids from getting to grade level? We know the reality pre-pandemic, 70% of kids who go to community college, the numbers aren't much better at four-year colleges, have to take remedial math. So even though they're promoted year after year, the colleges are saying you essentially have to go back to 6th or 7th grade. And we know the numbers are worse for Latino students and for Black students and for low-income students. And so my view is that's all because of this unfinished learning, and people kind of ignore it and just keep promoting along. We want to be part of that. And we know that if we don't do anything, it's going to be that much worse because of the pandemic. So it's not technology for technology's sake, but it's technology for making sure you have access to rigorous coursework, making sure you have access to supports so that you can engage in rigorous coursework, making sure that there's tools for students, teachers, and families that are free or accessible so that we can work with the classrooms, work with teachers to make sure that they can really differentiate for the needs of every student.
Thank you. And what resource would you direct the advocates, reporters, and others on this discussion to visit?
So there's several. We actually have a Spanish language. Well, there's a Spanish Khan Academy, es.khanacademy.org. Obviously, there's EnglishKhanAcademy.org. We have Sigamos Aprendiendo, which is our Keep Everyone Learning site that we created during the pandemic. People should check out not only khanacademy.org, but also schoolhouse.world to look at the tutoring we're doing. And many states have announced that they're going to be using this platform to engage as many students as possible in high quality tutoring. But yeah, those are the ones that are coming to mind.
Thanks for that. I've heard at least two of our panelists talk about kind of whole children, being whole children in any classroom environment. And it makes me think about the connection between access, high quality learning, and of course, social emotional learning, right? Something that's an increasingly, and a practice that is getting increasing attention in education. And from an equity perspective, I want to open to the entire panel for this question of what is the connection between the digital divide or technology access, high quality learning in person and online, and in the future of hybrid environments, and social emotional learning that allows in the racial reckoning that we're in, that demands attention to whole children and whole communities, and communities that get to live safe and comfortable and progressing lives. How do we connect these things for the future of educational equity?
Jason, if you don't mind, I'll jump in, because we in fact have are developing a framework for whole child education that is specific for Latino learners. It is a concern of ours that Latino students come to school with so many pro-school behaviors and yet come in and they're already delayed even in kindergarten. So we think that a whole child framework that embraces students' culture, embraces sort of what Roberto was alluding to, we looking at Latino students from an asset-based perspective, making this work student-led, focusing on restorative justice, focusing on healing students from the traumas that they've gone through this pandemic, and an education that is truly transformational. We have a chance to do this right now. I'm not sure I am as optimistic as my fellow panelists about what we'll be able to accomplish, but we do have an opportunity to change education at this point. And I think if we can finally marry what we know about brain development, language development, all of that incredible research that's come out over the last 20 years, with a series of beliefs and attitudes about whole child and what children can do, then I think we actually might be getting closer to what everybody seems to see. And I also want to believe in a very different future for our students.
Thank you, Peggy. Welcome others to add to those thoughts.
I think Peggy brings up a couple, kind of critical points when we think about how we combine resources. But I do think we have to approach it from an asset-based perspective. I'm reminded, as Peggy was talking about, a book by Angela Valenzuela called Subtractive Schooling, and it focused on Latino students in Texas. And what they found was that Latino students were being taught that their culture was bad. And so we really have to turn that around and make it a more asset-based perspective and use resources that speak to those assets that Latinos bring to the table. So I think of or reminded of Tara Yasso, who talks about cultural community wealth. And so she looks at bilingualism as an asset, not not as a deficit, especially for low-income Latino students. We tend to celebrate it when it's high-income folks who are bilingual, but we tend to look at it very negatively when it's low-income folks who are bilingual. And so she creates this framework. And so if we can combine the use of internet-based technologies, the use of placement in high, especially in courses of rigor with additional supports, and we think about what are the additional wraparound support services from an asset-based perspective that the student needs to be provided, then I think we could actually create an environment where students are placed in a setting where they're thriving and not just passing. And so I do think that there is a way, if we think about looking at what students bring to the table as asset-based and not deficit-based, where we can do that. But I do think it takes, as I was thinking about what Roberto was saying about the Phoenix project, like we really do need to rethink schooling in a way that it isn't just, that the banker's approach to schooling, what Fieri talked about, where we're thinking we're just going to deposit knowledge into these students. Students and families and communities also have something to give back to us as educators. And I think we really do need to approach these conversations in a way that there's a two-way communication happening, that it isn't just us telling students and families and communities what they need, but listening back to what it is that they need to be successful and thrive in an educational environment.
Thank you. For our participants, please use the Q&A feature. We'd love to feature your questions. We have one question from Maritza Solano in the audience, but before we go there, I'd like to bring any other voices that would like to respond to what was just being talked about.
Yeah, what I like to I like to add to that, to this great conversation. It's about, we all know, it's about social emotional. Of course, our children will come to this post-pandemic, all having differences in terms of social emotional or academic needs. They will never be the same. So we can't really standardize our children anymore. And unfortunately, that we used to do with the standardized testing, right? Just making this vision that we have standard children when we don't have that. So now our children are coming with different, with differing social, emotional, or academic needs post-pandemic. I do believe that, Roberto mentioned something about opportunities. Yes, now we have, these huge and immense opportunities to rethink how education is going to happen and how education really is going to be impacting positively to our children. The educational system will never be the same. Higher education will never be the same. K through 12 will never be the same. We're going into, a very different direction in education. Bilingualism now, and I would agree with Will about this, bilingual education, bilingualism is something that is more, right now it has really received this push because the importance that we have seen in bilingual education now is more than ever. So we see that students are receiving attention in the schools. We see, of course, there is a lot to do, with more in terms of creating more opportunities. But definitely, I think that the fact that our students are now we are receiving some attention, like there are some states like Illinois, for example. We have now a bill that has created standards, and the standards are about culturally competencies for teachers. So teachers and leaders. So that means that any standard that the students are going to be going through, they have to be culturally competent. Teacher has to receive that, and the leaders as well, the school. So I think this has been a great opportunity, and we continue to be elaborating in these opportunities for our children.
Thank you. Roberto, I think you wanted to add something.
No, it's good. Thank you. And I'm so glad that Ana raised the wonderful new standards in Illinois, in the state of Illinois, around cultural competent teaching and leading, which is an effort that our fellows worked on a bit with the State Board of Education and the Secretary to really begin to build a bit of a roadmap around what cultural competence should look like in our classrooms. And that's such an important part of this evolution toward more of an asset-based approach that we're all talking about here. It's about thinking about how we practice that competence in our teaching, in our engagement, in the relationships, as Will says, and that we build around our students, and also to think about how and really examine closely, how does that show up in our curriculum? You know, how does that show up in what our students are reading and how they're learning and the type and the materials that they're engaging in day to day. I do have great hope for the future. I think one of the examples that I'm most optimistic about is the one that Juliana Urtubi, who is our National Teacher of the Year this year, Latina teacher from Clark County, Nevada, happens to also be a Teach Plus Policy Fellow. She is an amazing leader that approaches each day with her bilingual kids around how to bring that asset-based approach to them, to see them and to listen to them and to hear them for who they are and to celebrate them as she's teaching them, and to reach out to the families and to her parents and her community around her. So, you know, all that we know about the science of learning, all that we know about the research around the social and emotional relationships that our kids build, and how important that is to their cognitive and academic development, teaches us that this is a leap we need to make for the future, and we need to be sure we are charting that out. I want to applaud UNIDOS for their great work, and Peggy for helping to map what that blueprint might look like for our Latino community.
I certainly want to end with questions from the audience. Before I do, though, poll results. We asked at the beginning of this call, what's the biggest challenge facing Hispanic students as schools reopen? 49% of us said learning loss is the big gap, and lack of access to technology is second place by 21%, access to vaccines 6%, and getting readjusted to the new in-school environment at 21%. We have two questions in the chat. I'm going to ask both of them. Marisa Solano of Maryland asks, where should advocates go for guidance in being good advocates around recovery funds? And Matthew, Matthew, a school board member in Delaware, asks where to go for good policy resources for board members like himself. Questions can go to anyone.
You know, I would say quickly for advocates, you know, there have been a lot of great resources dropped in the chat, but I would say that advocates should be really pushing districts to use the billions of dollars pushed out to schools to use research-based interventions and some of the things that we talked about. But I would also stress that they should be pushing for data on who's receiving what benefits, disaggregated by race, ethnicity, for English language learners, income level, and at the very least, students with special needs. And so I'd say there was a lot of great resources dropped in the chat that I would encourage folks to push their districts on, but also to be requesting that data be made public on who's receiving that, and have that data disaggregated so that we have some sense. Are there gaps in who's getting services? Who's getting, you know, additional learning time? Who's getting access to additional services that, provided by these dollars?
Thank you very much. For the reporters and the advocates on the line, this conversation was intended to be a resource for you. We hope that you will reach out. We'd love to work with you on stories with any of our discussants or any others that we can connect you with. For advocates, please use the resources, reach out. All of the organizations represented here today are happy to be of service to you. So please take us up on the offer. As we get ready to end this discussion, I'm going to ask each of our speakers to just end with 10 to 15 seconds. What are the things that we must get right in the next year to ensure that learning loss doesn't become a cataclysm 3, 4, and 5 years down the line? What are the things that we must get right? 10 to 15 seconds each, and then we will end this wonderful discussion. Let's start with Will.
Well, I'm sad I have to go first. I'd love to hear what everyone else have to say, but I think that we know that relationships matter. And so if we do not establish relationship with students and communities, and then I think that students, that the relationship, if it's adversarial, if it's confrontational, whatever it is, we're not going to be able to catch students up if we don't get relationships right.
Thank you. Peggy?
I think that if we don't shift from what we know in the research to having an actual impact on our practices, we will have lost a really great opportunity. And also students, just to follow up with what Will was saying, just to foster that sense of belonging that students need to be able to learn effectively.
Thank you very much, Roberto.
Yeah, we have a tremendous opportunity in this moment, right? But it depends on us making sure we make wise use of this $130 billion in our system, right? How do we make sure those dollars are put to use for our learners? I love the points on transparency, follow the data, make sure that we are spending those in ways that put our students first and that empower the voices and expertise of our teachers to help create that roadmap.
Great. Anna?
Yeah, I would like to say that we need to make sure that every Latino that has some sort of influences, we need to be seated at the table. We can't be any longer under the table. And I hope, that really could be something that we keep seeing, in the future.
Thank you. Sal?
I think the low-hanging fruits, making sure people are aware of the resources that already exist, especially the ones that are free and accessible. We talked about digital divide. And then I think in terms of the funding that's coming, have some ambitious small-scale experiments and realize that this is a 3-year journey and we want to create systems that can last beyond those 3 years.
Thank you. And Dr. Armstrong, we're going to give you the second to last word. And Ali, we will give you the last word on the things that as advocates, we must think about for the future.
So what we've got to get right is this. We already have 15 years of learning loss data through the Katrina study. We don't need to spend another 15 years collecting more data on that. What we need to do to get right this time is be very, very strategic. I'm like a dog on a bone here with those ARP funds. These are one-time funds. So make the best use out of them for kids. Turn that 20% far-reaching and more than just 20% minimum. Use it for kids.
Thank you very much. Ali Garcia, I'm going to give you the very last word for the advocates, the reporters, the community in this call. What do you want to make sure that we get right over the next year so that your brother and others have a better educational future than the one behind us?
For sure. I think we talked a lot about the resources that we need to offer the students, and that's amazing. I think we have a really good base for research and spilling out resources. I think something for the students and as a student perspective is encouraging the students and seeing and giving them the resources like you mentioned, or like it was mentioned, we have a limited supply of teachers that actually represent like a Latino student. So I think seeing more Latino teachers, getting a lot of more motivation speakers or something that's going to encourage our students, because our students are really disheartened. They're really discouraged in times like this. So more focus on that, I think, is going to really plant the seed that we need for future leaders.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who joined this call as participant and speaker. I certainly learned quite a bit, and I'm inspired to see what we go and build together. Have a great night, everyone.